We do want to turn to the news here with President Biden's star-studded fundraiser at Radio City Music Hall last night. The Biden campaign says it raised more than $26 million at the event.
Wow.
5,000 people attended. It was hosted by actor and comedian Mindy Kaling. Special guests Queen Latifah, Lizzo, Ben Platt all performed. The highlight of the fundraiser, though, a conversation between President Biden and former presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. Discussion was moderated by late-night host Stephen Colbert. The presidents talk about a wide range of issues, including the war in Gaza and the need to protect our democracy. They also took some jabs at former president and presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump. The event was met with pro-Palestinian protesters, some of whom interrupted that conversation among the presidents. A large group also marched outside of Radio City Music Hall, calling for an end to the war in Gaza. Let's bring in White House correspondent for Reuters, Jeff Mason. He was one of the few reporters inside Radio City for last night's event. Jeff, good morning. Thanks for stopping through on your way out of town after the event last night. Take us inside the room, if you could. What was it like during that event?
My pleasure, Willie. It was electric in that room. There were more than 5,000 people in Radio City Music Hall, so a lot of bodies, a lot of energy, a lot of excitement, especially to see, I think, the former presidents and, of course, President Biden. They came onto stage by being sort of lifted up with one of those platforms that comes up. So it was a very rock star moment, and it was a rock star night for the Democrats and for President Biden. They had a long discussion with Colbert, as you mentioned, about everything from peace in the Middle East to the economy. And the former presidents really laid out a case for Biden. We've been hearing Biden lay out his own case, but last night what he did was he sort of sat aside and let his predecessors talk about what it's like to be president and why he should get a second term.
I mean, $26 million, Jeff, such a staggering sum for one night, and it just adds to an already significant and growing cash advantage that Biden and the Democrats have over Trump and the Republicans. As Willie noted, there were some protests outside and some interruptions inside the hall as well about the war in Gaza. Tell us how the presidents, particularly President Obama, handled this, and whether you think that could almost be a blueprint for President Biden going forward, because this issue is not going away.
It's certainly not going away, and it's been dogging President Biden throughout this campaign politically. I thought it was interesting to see how President Obama responded. He was giving a response about Gaza and was interrupted and said, look, you have to listen, not just talk. And that was a moment that really resonated with the crowd. He was kind of sharp in a way that we haven't seen Biden be sharp. And I understand that the president has tried to show a lot of understanding for the people who disagree with his policy. He's said before, let them talk. They feel passionately about this, and they do. And it's an important part of the president's coalition that he's trying to get back before November. But Obama and Clinton laid out reasons for the people who have maybe moved away from Biden to come back. And one of them was saying President Biden, in a way that President Trump probably would not be, is an advocate for Palestinians, has been pushing really hard for a two-state solution, and will continue to do that. And President President Obama also made an interesting statement about saying there can't be a purity test. And he spoke about that from his perspective of having been in the White House.
Gene, just hearing about what President Obama did last night, it does remind me how great he is at this. I remember if there was a sort of height of wokeism, and I don't say that to trigger anybody, I just use that term because, 2017, 2018, 2019 was sort of peak wokeism. Of course, Trumpers will say that they're all coming to eat our bones one day soon. But in the middle of, let's just say, the most pitched debate, maybe it's 2020, President Obama was at, speaking at Nelson Mandela Day, an event. And he said, listen, if you don't let somebody debate and talk and say their words are invalid because they're white, or because they're a man, or because they're Hispanic, or because they're black, well, you really don't have a real debate, and you're only hurting yourself. And it was a message that not just because he was black, but because he's Barack Obama and he can do these things so well. It was a message that only Obama could deliver. It's the same thing last night when Obama's telling left-wing protesters, hey, you know, we got to learn to talk to each other. It resonates. And it's quite a moment last night there.
Yeah, it really was quite a moment. He's very, very good at that. Barack Obama is very, very good at telling you you're full of it in a way that's, if not charming, then something close to it, and getting the message across and making you pay attention. I've been on the end of that sort of "you're full of it" message from Obama a couple of times, and I know what it's like. He is what a collection of political talent on that stage last night. You know, if you've got Barack Obama and you've got Bill Clinton, they know a bit about being president, and they talked a lot about that, but they also know a whole lot about running for president and about speaking to this country in a way that represents Democratic Party views, progressive views to varying degrees, while not sort of turning others off necessarily, and it triggers. Obviously, Obama triggers some people. He triggers Donald Trump massively, but wow, what a night, what an event, and $26 million is just a staggering amount of money to have raised in one evening. It's just it just boggles the mind. It gives a sense of the Biden campaign as something of a juggernaut, while Donald Trump worries about his court cases and cheats to win his own golf tournament.
Yeah, Jeff, Obama clearly triggers Donald Trump to the degree that Trump still seems to think he's running against Obama or has run against Obama at some point. There was also that phone call for the donors who couldn't actually make it to Radio City, be there in person. There was a phone call with campaign managers beforehand, which I thought was really interesting, where they laid out, the three presidents laid out their theory of the case with the campaign managers as well to donors. Give us a sense of what there was a bit about personal stories, how they felt that was going to be so important. Did you have a sense of that from that call, of what we should be looking ahead to?
Well, I think it was in part, an opportunity for the three presidents to bring in non-big dollar donors. The Biden campaign has been proud of saying that a good chunk, I think 80 or 90% of the money that they've brought in has been from people who donate less than $200. And last night was a big glitzy event with tickets that in some cases cost as much as $500,000. And I think to stay on brand, they also wanted to have a chance for other people to weigh in and to have a chance to see the three presidents. So I think that was the goal, and personal story is certainly part of it, and more broadly, just laying out that case, again, for why Biden should have a second term.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.